I'm back here and today I brought who? You asked for it, here's the poll. Look, Allan Holdsworth, the alien or monster of fusion guitar. If you don't know Allan Holdsworth, who is this guy? Well, he's a master, right? He was a master, a genius of the guitar. And of course he goes far beyond fusion, but he was very well known for certain aspects, one of which was composing with chord melody in mind, a bit pianistic, and a bit like classical orchestration. Take a look. Besides that, he improvised in a very peculiar way, and this greatly influenced modern fusion, especially on the guitar. He had a very wind instrument-like aspect, right? He played with drive, and the way he articulated the notes was very reminiscent of wind instruments. This segment here is Lesson with the Master, where I choose based on your choices, right? Oh, again. This segment here is Lesson with the Master, where I take names that you chose in the poll I conduct, right? You chose Allan Holdsworth and I brought him. And the intention of this video here is not to talk about the guys playing style. Very deeply. It's a video, right folks, of 10-15 minutes. So I prefer to address topics from interviews that I think you can benefit from. So I actually took excerpts from 2 interviews, right? It's difficult to extract much from Allan Holdsworth because he was a very introspective guy. In the first interview, he was even more lively, happy man, but in the second, he was super tired, not very willing to talk. So I took excerpts from these 2 interviews. And guys, if you've been enjoying this series, right, Lesson with the Master, give me that support. You know how? By sharing this video. It's the best thing you can do to keep this series going, okay? You have no idea of the work involved in researching the video, translating, and then editing. So I count on your help by sharing and already leaving a like. At the beginning of this interview, he talks about how he was introduced to music, and he talks about his father, right? That his father, since he was a child, was an amateur artist, liked to paint, listened to music, played some instruments. I don't remember if he played some instruments or not, but from a very young age, he was introduced to classical music, jazz, and he listened to a lot of wind instrument albums, right? At that time, the guitar was still gaining popularity and everything, and that was how he had his first relationship with music. He said he was very emotional, that he would listen to music, cry, but he didn't necessarily have the intention to play. He was just absorbing all that world that was being presented to him. And he talks a lot about his father, how his father was important, introducing not only the sound, but he remembers that his father would take him to watch shows in pubs, and he would introduce, look, my son here plays guitar. Wouldn't you give him an opportunity? So he was very encouraged as well. So let's listen now to this first part of the interview.
It was many years later when I started to get interested in wanting to play like a horn, a saxophone, because I started listening to a lot of saxophones. I didn't have much interest in the guitar. I don't remember having a great interest in the guitar that big short.
So, something that I think is extremely important for you to try to delve into more deeply is the following. You can feel in Allan Holdsworth's sound, and perhaps this was one of the points that made him so unique, that from the beginning his influence wasn't coming from guitarists, right? He listened to a lot of wind instruments. He tried to replicate that sound in the way he soloed, right? Basically, Allan Holdsworth is playing continuously connected. The way he articulated the sound is this drive with sustain. For what, man? It's really to manipulate the type of sound of a wind instrument where you can keep the note sounding for longer. The sound doesn't fade away like it does with a clean sound. So his entire sound articulation, you feel this closeness, right, with the wind instruments. But of course, when you put it on the guitar, and he has that very distinctive, right, the way he plays with his fingers super spread out, right, using the 4th finger a lot. 3 notes per string, but it's a way he found to use legato to facilitate this articulation to ultimately produce a sound closer to wind instruments. Listen more closely to this video and you'll notice that he manages to have a lot of rhythmic density, meaning he can play many notes without losing this articulation, without having to use alternate picking. In fact, I've already mentioned this in other videos and cited a book called Why Generalists Triumph in a Specialist World, and Allan Holdsworth is a very clear example of a guy who brought influences from other places into his sound. In other words, a large part of innovation comes exactly from this, from picking up something from elsewhere and bringing it into your own field. This happens with music, it happens with science, with art in general. Often, the innovative solution isn't found by looking within your own segment, but by bringing in a solution from outside. And he wasn't necessarily doing this intentionally, right? On the contrary, it seems that for him it was very natural, right from the start. It was the sound he had in his head that he was simply trying to bring out. Now, taking a segment from another interview, he talks about his process of playing compositions at shows. Take a look.
But everything is composed, but it's basically like any other, even in a normal jazz form. It's like having a tune, a chord sequence, and we played what we saw over the chord sequence.
Why did I choose to share this segment with you? You notice that Allan Holdsworth's fusion is heavily based on this jazz mentality. What is the jazz mentality like? You take the real book, The Great Jazz Improvisers, the theme was there, the theme was short, 20, 30 seconds, the ABBA form, and then came the solo, right? In a way, the songs were even similar because they wanted to, well, simply, improvise over the progressions. Allan Holdsworth obviously has a very interesting composition process, but it's the same tendency that, here is the form of the music, right? The melody, the chord progression, and then when we go to the solo, we are soloing over this chord progression that was being played along with the melody. If the form is ABBA in the theme, right? In the melody, we will improvise over the ABBA. And what matters a lot to people, right, in jazz with this mentality is for you to improvise, really, to be open to risk, and for the band to be open to interact and make music in that moment. So, despite Allan Holdsworth's way of improvising being a bit introspective, right, you don't feel him engaging as much with the band as jazz musicians usually do, but you feel that there is an openness there and the band is constantly creating layers. Since it's a more fusion sound, right, it's less open to this engagement. Abrupt dynamic changes as it is in jazz, right? Back and forth, back and forth. Allan's sound has this openness, right, of jazz in a way. It's a bit more restrained when it comes to engaging with the band. I chose a segment for us to close by talking about musicality. Look how cool.
If John McLaughlin played the trumpet, it would be an incredible song. So if Pat Metheny played the piano, it would be a great piano. I don't think it matters. I think it's kind of the tool. It's just, the instrument is just something you use to try to express. The instrument, in a way, isn't really that important.
Talks about John McLaughlin, about Pat Metheny. If these guys played other instruments, they would be amazing in the same way because they are incredible musicians. So what Allan is saying here, is that musicality is inside you. You need to develop your musicality, and the instrument is just a means. If you take the word instrument by itself, that's exactly what it means, right? It's an intermediary between you and the listener. So it doesn't matter much which instrument you are using. If you have music inside you and you can bring it out, that's what matters. And I say this with a bit of caution because when I was younger, I used to hear this kind of comment and I kind of thought it was nonsense. But folks, if you don't learn to develop musicality, right? The tools of expression, dynamics, development of motifs, if you don't learn to be lyrical and focus only on the mechanical side, you become very much a slave to the instrument instead of serving the music. Does that make sense to you? Tell me here, what was the coolest insight you got from these interviews I did with Allan Holdsworth? Write to me. Do you have a suggestion for the next name? Did you like it? Leave that like here and you're already subscribed, right? And if you're interested in studying with me, in the description, I talk about my virtual and in-person music school in Rio de Janeiro, okay? God bless you. Big hug.